And it says we're live, unless the CIA is lying to us because they didn't like my recent Agarus Nexus article. That should mean that we are definitely being seen by the general public. I have the pleasure of speaking with Robert Landen today of The Moral Approach. He tries to improve police-citizen relations and generally tell people how to survive their encounters with cops, and cops how to be less of the threat people think that they are, so that they don't think they have to survive anything. So, with that being said, this is brought to you by Liberty Professionals, who will help you secure your home, small business, and life. It's run by a residential security expert who's an ASIS board certified physical security professional. And if you need work done in the Virginia area, they do missing persons investigations, skip tracing, and more. Contact them for more info. He has all the necessary tools in his toolbox to bring you peace of mind and stability for the future. Support Liberty businesses and these streams by heading over to libertyprofessionals.com to get your consult today. It's also brought to you by Agarus Nexus, who I'm doing a special ad read today because I want you all to go check out the article I recently wrote for them, proving concretely that Facebook is not a private company. It I highlighted the fact that Facebook, from its funding to its utility to everything about it, including databasing things so that apps like Clearview, which for those of you who've been subscribed for a while, you know I have a very strong issue with, can use those databases of public info to immediately know everything about you from one screenshot. So, with all that being said, Facebook is a dystopian nightmare run by and for the government. It's not a private company, and if you want to know why, feel free to check out agoristnexus.com, and my recent article is up there as of today. So, with all that being said, Robert, I understand you run a website to try to consult people in how to form better relations with cops and to uh, sort of instruct cops on how to be more for the people. So, before we get into anything, I wanted to ask you, if you could introduce yourself and let us know how you got into this kind of stuff in the first place.
Well, my name's Robert Landen, and I have had many dealings with cops in the past. I've won them over. I've gotten them to ignore the laws. And going back a long time, my dad used to do that. We had friends who were cops. I even rode around with cops. I know how they think. I hung out with them. I was never a cop myself, but people treated me like one when I was riding around in one of their cars. And so we're just really good at winning them over, getting them to ignore the law and and deciding what to do based on their moral principles. So I kind of made a mission to win over as many cops as I can. If I can get the cops to ignore the laws when it comes to peaceful people, people who've done no harm, I'm not talking about angels. I'm not talking about pacifists. I'm talking about just people who don't harm other peaceful people. So no harm's been done. No harm should be done. And cops agree with me. They like it. They thank me for helping them out. They say that they never thought of it that way, and they feel better that they can judge situations based on moral principles instead of using politicians' dictates as an excuse to harm people, to rob people, to intimidate them. And the best part is that their lives become more peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And cops have put out their hand and shook my hand and thanked me for basically enlightening them and putting them on a path to a peaceful life. So my mission is to win over as many cops as possible, and I'm going to do that by teaching other people how to do what I do.
Yeah, because
I took around.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go on.
Uh, I watch a lot of this channel's videos. There's a channel called Audit the Audit, and he goes over police interactions and eventually grades the participants based on their like adherence to the law, their understanding of their rights and legal proceedings, and that sort of thing. It's a very good channel. I would recommend people go check them out. But like, for instance, this morning I watched a recent video where a doctor tried to get officers off his property And he was 100% peaceful because they were blocking his driveway with their cars, and he was trying to get into his business, which is like a
Oh
refugee
yeah.
assistance program, and he was telling them to get out. And the first part of the interaction was an immediate escalation of the hierarchy of force, where the cop immediately pulled his gun out as he got out of his car, walked over to the guy's car with his gun drawn, and eventually held the guy at gunpoint, telling him that he needed to identify himself, prove the property was his. He lied that the guy like tried to drive his vehicle at the cop as a weapon. There's no proof of that, and footage disagrees. But you know, far be it from anyone to criticize a cop, but that's like all too common. And a lot of police interactions immediately jump that force hierarchy. So uh, a lot of these police that like they've been trained by people like Dave Grossman to get a charge off of immediately, you know, escalating that force hierarchy. And I'm wondering first and I guess foremost, how do you get through to that sort of cop whose immediate reaction is to escalate force and who's not really there to interface with the public but more there to control them?
Well, I try to get the talk to the human that's behind the costume and the badge, right? I don't really
Right.
want to talk to cops because when they're in that mode, they're they got to be dominating, right? So I try to ask them questions that would get them to give an answer based on moral principles. I mean, I simply ask them, how can you morally justify threatening a peaceful person with violence? And if we were in front of a jury and I asked you that on the witness stand, what would you tell the jury? So I try to, interrupt their pattern and get them to talk like a human being. I'll even say that to them. Say, look, I just want to have a conversation with you without the badge. Could you do that for me? And they'll even agree to that. I try to get them to agree to a peaceful resolution. I say, how about we resolve this peacefully? Can I count on you to work with me toward a peaceful resolution? And I've had them breathe a sigh of relief and shake my hand and agree. These guys are as indoctrinated as anyone else. And they're trained to violently victimize peaceful people. But if you talk to them as a human being, you can, through questioning, you can get them to realize that what they're doing actually goes against their moral principles, and they appreciate it. Now, it's not going to work with all of them. Yeah, there's some of them that are downright evil. But I think that doctor, I've seen that video, and I think there was an opportunity there where he could have won that cop over, right? He pulled a gun on him. He could have got out and simply said, look, I'm a peaceful guy. How can you morally justify pointing a gun at me? I need an answer, right? And try to win that cop over. Not saying you can, you're going to do it every time, but at least try,
Well,
right?
so are you
It's all
putting the onus on
bad.
the guy with the gun in his face, or like is it his job to convince the cop?
I've had a gun in my I've had a gun in my face. Yeah, they pointed guns at me, and I've gotten through to them. And I got one of them. He quit his job, or at least he told me he's going to quit. He had no idea what he was doing went against his own moral principles.
Okay, but
Uh,
is the onus on people who have the gun in their face to try, or is it more like something that they could do if they so chose?
Onus. I mean, the more people that do this, the better chance we have of winning them over, right? I mean, no, I don't want people sticking their necks out or getting shot over this. But I mean, he didn't have the gun pointed at him the whole time. He put the gun down, and that's the time to ask, how could you morally justify what you just did, right?
Well,
I mean,
well,
I'm trying to reach out and get them and win them over. I'm trying to help them. I'm not, you know, wanting to put anybody's life at risk. I'm not trying to make the cop feel bad. I'm just trying to get him to understand that this goes against his moral principles. The moral principles he has to keep suppressed to do that kind of job, if he has any. Not all of them have them, right? But go ahead.
well, right. So because one of the first things you learn in any sort of gun safety class is that you don't point your gun at anything you don't want to destroy. Not even if your finger's off the trigger, not even if it's unloaded, because you don't know whether or not it's like accidentally loaded. Um, And I think a lot of cops might ignore that. I think a lot of cops might not think, hey, I want to destroy this guy. But some of them do, and for those people, I'm not sure that like it's always safe to play sort of Russian roulette like that. And it's not like the cop immediately dropped his gun. He had the gun on the guy, like basically until the guy got his phone and pointed it at him, and then like still a little bit after that as he exited the vehicle. So I think the cop wanted to control the situation, and using that threat of deadly force over honking a horn seems to me to be like a lot bit extreme. So I'm wondering, like, in that sort of situation where a cop is clearly already okay with violating moral principles and pointing a deadly weapon at somebody for making a sound, um, like, how do you get the common person to be okay enough with that to calmly have a moral discussion with the cop?
Well, it sure beats the way that the doctor handled it. I mean, he was pretty abrasive. He was chastising them. He was
Why
being
why
nasty.
why wouldn't he?
You know, well, I mean, would you rather try to have a moral conversation and try to help someone? I mean, which one do you think would got a better chance of survival? You think chastising them is better? You're
Well,
talking to a guy with a gun who thinks he has a right to kill you for disobeying him.
first off, I think there's a maybe a thing to consider, which is a lot of cops are upset right now for the idea of ending qualified immunity. And a lot of them are saying that they might quit their jobs over that because they no longer get to be held to a different legal standard if that's the case. And like a lot of them also are saying similar things if the people aren't completely polite to them. Like a lot of these cops are getting this victim impression, like this woman who had a McMuffin that was a little late, and she broke down in tears in her car and said that cops are part of a
Yeah.
thankless job because and so we should all be nicer to cops because otherwise there's no reason to come to work. And I'm wondering if all it takes is a doctor calmly asserting his rights and still doing what he needs to do on his property, maintaining his Fourth Amendment right to, or sorry, Fifth Amendment right to not say anything that might incriminate him, so saying as little as possible. Um, I kind of think that that kind of attitude, when accepted as a mass adoption, might make it harder for cops to be able to violate rights, and so hard that a lot of them might quit. And I'd certainly rather have less cops than more cops when some of them are okay with like acting moral and some of them aren't even okay with a guy asking somebody to get off their property.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to win the cop over. I'm trying to get him to live by moral principles that he can defend, that he can justify. Okay. I mean, you can chastise them, you can yell at them, and you can hope they go away. But there's plenty of people lined up to be cops. And what are you going to do? You're going to get some of them to quit, and then who's going to replace them? Is it going to be someone who understands this, or is it going to be a younger guy who's more brutal? I mean, they're not going to go away. There's a paycheck involved, right? So I would rather win them over and get them on our side. I mean, let me tell you this. When I first started, I had cops quitting their job. And then people were telling me, well, wait a minute, if they quit, they're going to replace them with somebody worse. So I said, okay, well, what do I like about them? Well, it's nice for some people to be able to call some guys with guns to help them out at certain times. I'm okay with them chasing down rapists and child molesters and murderers and stuff like that. And I tell cops this: I support you when you do that. But when you threaten peaceful people with harm, I can't support that. How could you morally justify me supporting that?
And that's a reasonable line of questioning. Although, as an anarchist, and I'm sure you knew that I was an anarchist before you came on the show, and I understand you were also recently on another anarchist show, Adam Kokesh. So I think you're probably pretty familiar with the anarchist argument, and The anarchist argument is that you know the moral stance of government is indefensible, and that you really can't have a moral government, especially since cops' paychecks are funded by taxation. So, um, be, because of that inherent like sort of aggression that goes into their funding and their very structure, um, I think cops often are attracted to the position because they can be aggressors, and because they can join the violence monopoly. And that's why a lot of them get this bully mentality, like that cop who stopped those people outside of Kohl's, I think it was, who had legally bought everything in their car and accused them of shoplifting, and like when they said why do I need to show you my ID because I told you to, and he kept on being like basically a bully about it. And that's like one of thousands of examples of this sort of thing happening. And that's not when it doesn't end in deadly force, which I'm sure you know that cops kill like an average of 1,000 people a year. So, from that anarchist perspective, I get told a lot that anarchy would never work because a state would just crop up. And it seems like a sort of a variation on that same argument to say that police quitting would never work because worse police might replace them. Um, I think like whenever the government has to do more work to do what they need to do to oppress people, that's a good thing personally. And I understand that the moral approach might help some cops be better people, absolutely. And I'm not saying like it wouldn't, but to say that it's bad to try and get cops to quit, to me, that seems like a dismissal of an entire tactic that could work for the benefit of the people. For instance, I mean, Dale Brown of Viper's Threat Management does a really good job, and he's not a cop. And a lot of the people who work for Vipers are ex cops and ex military. So they know how it could work, and they chose the better path. So I think cops that quit might still be able to do the position and just not as a cop.
You covered a lot there. One part of my plan is to get the cops paid on a voluntary basis. Once I get them won over, enough of them won over, right?
Right,
To
right.
where they are actually protecting peaceful people, right? And then they can win over other cops, and then the minority who's going to be the violent ones, maybe not in every city and town, but I'd say the majority of, if you took all the cops together, the majority of them probably have good intentions, I imagine, right? But there's a lot of them that are just downright evil. Well, I want them pushed out, you know. And now, if you're talking about leaving peaceful people alone, that opens up competition. Now you can open up your own cop shop. I know Dale Brown pretty well, and I used to talk to him, and I don't know what happened to him, but we disagreed on one thing. He thinks you should obey the cops right away, and I say obeying them gives them an illusion of jurisdiction, gives them power over you. The second you obey, you're starting to lose, because the next time you don't obey, they're going to hurt you. But anyway, back to that. It allows competition. Dale Brown could run TV commercials. Instead of calling the police, call us. We're peaceful. We de-escalate,
Right.
And then the cops say, hey, maybe I'll go work for this guy. That sounds like a better company, right? And then
Yeah,
the police are out of business.
yeah, and to my knowledge, they've never actually had to use deadly force. The last time I asked him, Dale Brown said that they've never once used it. That they've gotten close, I think, but they've never once used it because they try to practice de-escalation as the primary modus, and non lethal defense when it comes to it. I think his people are all trained in martial arts. Um, but like,
Yeah.
okay, so you disagree then with obeying cops immediately. So like you think that there's like sort of a line that you got to tread carefully between say that doctor's approach, which was not being polite but not being like hostile either, and being the worst person the police has had to interact with that day, or like actively continuing to break the law in front of them, like some civil disobedience act, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Well, I mean, I look at the results. I mean, the cops I talk to shake my hand and thank me. And I'm sure they don't bother peaceful people again because they feel better about themselves. The cops that left that doctor, do you think they went on to live a better life, a more peaceful life? Do you think they left other people alone? Or do you think maybe they went out there and abused somebody else out of frustration because they just got treated like shit?
I mean,
Which,
that's an understandable question, but when they have the ability to just abuse somebody because they're frustrated, doesn't that say more about the position than the individual?
well, yeah, and what they did was wrong. And I'm not saying anything the doctor did was wrong. I was actually very impressed with what he did. I'm glad he stood up. I'm glad he told them off. I really am.
Gotcha.
But it could have been done better. Could have been done better. He could have reached out and tried to win them over. See, when if I was in that position, I'd have had that cop and three other cops because I've done this many times, and I end up holding a class. I end up taking questions from all the cops, and we're having a discussion about this. I've even had cops bring up anarchy. I had one cop say, "Oh, wait a minute, you're talking about anarchy." I said, "I never said anything about anarchy, but you did. So it sounds like you want to talk about it. So let's talk about it."
Okay,
Okay. This opens up discussion on freedom. It's
so if I understand it correctly, do you support anarchy or are you a minarchist more like?
Oh, I gave up those labels years ago. I did 10, 15 years ago. I called myself an anarchist. I went to voluntarist because that was anarchist was turning people off. Voluntarist, they even use that in court documents against me and tried to say, I just don't need labels.
Right.
It's not necessary. I mean, I'm trying to sell status on freedom, and I don't want to start out with a label that it basically introduces me as someone evil, right? That's what they think. Anarchy's evil. So
Right.
why would I want to label myself that? Plus, the other problem I have with labels is it causes conflict. I mean, I know anarchists who argue and hate libertarians and libertarian, and I'm just back and forth with all these labels. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just some guy uh, crawling around on a rock, speeding through the universe. That's my label. That's it.
So basically, your approach is instead of treating police like some monolith, instead of treating them like they all speak for one another and they're all relatively similar, try to find who they are as like an individual. Is that it?
Well, yeah, I mean, they have discretion, and I learned this from a cop, from a deputy sheriff. He goes, "We have discretion." And I asked him what that means. He says, "Well, we can basically ignore the laws whenever we want." And I said, "Well, what do you base that decision on? You know, do you base it on the law if you're going to ignore the law, or do you base it on your moral principles?" And he said, "You're right. It's a good point." And I said, "Well, why not base every interaction on your moral principles? And if no harm's been done, why not do no harm? Fair enough." And he's like, "Yeah, sounds good to me." I mean, this is not that complicated. I don't have to bring up anarchy. I don't have to talk about all this other stuff. I just get them to live by their moral principles.
Well, two questions then. So I'll start with the first most obvious one. Police often see each other as more connected than they are with the common person. For instance, Dave Grossman's wildly successful classes in training cops, that which I went over in my video debunking the war on cops. Basically, he instructs people to see people as targets and to see them also as sheep. He teaches people how to be sheepdogs over the sheep, to protect the sheep from the wolves, seeing people as different castes of people, all as members of some amorphous and undefined baseless collective, to the point where the common person is seen as nothing more than something to be moved in a direction, like a sheep. Like, if you don't do what we say, we'll use our teeth. And he also teaches cops that they'll feel great after killing somebody. That they should feel okay with killing somebody. This is very popular training, and he's not the only one. The IDF also does it. Um, and it results in this mentality of the thin blue line and the blue code of silence. And it also results in Punisher logos being on police cars to the point where the creator of the Punisher had to say he's supposed to be a symbol of the decay of law enforcement, not a symbol of law enforcement itself. Um, so what I'm wondering is when police are more and more militarized and more like a gang, why should we see them as anything other than a threat when they approach us with that force continuum that ultimately results in a significant amount of death?
Well, I mean, I look at it this way: the cops are just as enslaved as the rest of us. They just have a few extra privileges. They can rob us and beat us up and kill us whenever they want. But they got to pay. They got to get a license. They got to get a tag. They got to obey, just like the rest of us. So the way I look at it is, I want them to switch teams. I want them to come over to our side and protect us from that, right? And I want to win over as many and they seem to love it so far. So I mean, you can hate them if you want. You can chastise them. You can say, people put them down, and people have unfriended me because I don't agree with the whole FTP. I don't know if you can curse on your show or
Oh
not.
yeah, yeah. I say fuck, I say cunt. It doesn't matter.
Okay, okay. I don't like fuck the police because I'm trying to win them over. All right. Yeah, I know a lot of them are nasty bastards, but I try to. I don't want that kind of image. Okay. I'm working at winning them over. Maybe I fail. That's fine. I don't care. I'm going to keep trying because I've won over a lot of them, and I know I can win over a lot more. In fact, my goal is to flip a whole sheriff's department. In fact, I got an interview coming up with a guy who's Joe Lopez. He's been a state trooper for 30 something years, and he's running for sheriff for Orange County. And Monday night, I'm going to be interviewing him and trying to show everybody how I win the cops over. I want to. If I could flip a whole sheriff's department, I could free a whole town, a whole county,
Well,
and no one will have to get a license. No one will have to get a tag. You can do those things if you want, but you're not going to be punished if you don't. They're going to leave peaceful people alone. This is my mission, to get one done so others can emulate a free county, right?
and
Go ahead. You had a question.
that's understandable. So just to backtrack a little, you say that they have to obey just like the rest of us, but policies like the Blue Code of Silence and qualified immunity both compound to mean that they don't have to do exactly what we have to do. And they can often get away with doing
No,
like things that the law actively tells them they can't do. And a decent chunk of the time, this has been used to promote abject civil rights violations, and the rest of the time it's been used to like promote the dismissal of charges that would get the common person significant sentencing, because the person who did it was cop. So what I'm wondering is, because you say that they all have to obey just like us, where does that come from? Because as far as like myself and many others are concerned, a lot of cops get away with a lot of stuff because they're not held to the same standard and they're not treated in the same way.
a lot of people get away with a lot of stuff. I mean, half the murders go unsolved, half the rapes go unsolved. You can get away with pretty much anything you want if you really try. The cops, there's a lot of cops in prison right now. There's a lot of cops in jail. There's a lot of cops facing charges right now.
But how many of
Uh,
them?
I, I'm just saying that I admit that they have more privilege. They can get away with murder. They can make you disappear if they want you to disappear and never get charged with anything. They're a very dangerous gang, violent gang,
Right.
right? What I'm trying to do is win them over and get them to stop doing that. Now, like I said, I may not be able to do it, but I'm going to try, right? Because if we can win them over and get them on our side, then the politicians don't have anything. They can pass all the laws they want and try to start wars, but they're not going to be able to do anything without the police making us pay and obey like slaves,
Right.
right? I mean, the police are just as enslaved, except they have privileges. They can kill us at will. I understand that. And there's a lot of them out there that enjoy it and get away with it, and they have immunity. I get that. But if we can flip most of the cops and get them to actually feel good about their job and push those guys out Actually try to win them over. Let's say I get a half a dozen cops and I win them over, and they love peaceful policing, and they go to work and they're trying to win over their brothers, brothers in blue, and say, hey, this is much better. Let's just turn this whole department into a peaceful policing. It's so much better. But then you got the diehards who are like, no, I love brutalizing and beating people up and stealing from them. And then so they can push them out. They don't have to file charges. They don't have to file complaints. They can just say, hey, you're not welcome here. They do that now, except they do it to people that report them for doing bad things, right?
Mm.
That's the bad ones that are pushing out the good ones. I'm trying to make them mostly good to push out the bad.
And that's understandable. Okay. So I guess a good follow up question is, what kind of transparency is there in the departments which which you've had success with, to your understanding?
Well, I mean, I've had success with individual cops. I mean, I don't know about the transparency of what of
Well,
their function.
uh, yeah, the department as in like, how transparent are they about what they do? Like, do they file reports about the policing that are accessible to the public? Do they have like regular town halls? Do like, because the question with success in situations like these could be comparable to that of like addicts. You have to follow up and you have to make sure that the addict is, you know, getting like the same level of stability over time, hasn't hit the substances again, and hasn't like sort of recidivized. Um, and if we're talking about a criminal gang of people that like regularly use violence and force against the people, I'm curious as to the level of transparency that these departments have, whether or not you could follow up with them later and find out whether or not the training stuck.
I mean, I've talked to trainers of police, and they like this, and I would like to go in and train the cops on my moral approach. You know, if any cops are watching this, tell your boss. I'll be glad to show up and do some training. Um, the transparency, though, I mean, we're talking about a violent gang. I mean, how much transparency do you think you're going to get? Right? I'm surprised that they even release dash cam and body cam footage, you know, when they can just simply delete it. It amazes me that they're obedient to a certain level, right? They'll even release video footage that is evidence against them. It's kind of strange, but they're just as enslaved. They do it because they know they have to obey, or they think they have to obey. Um, but I mean, transparent, isn't it obvious? They violently and financially punish peaceful people day in and day out for disobeying dictates. It's transparent that what they're doing is evil. I wouldn't lock up another human being unless they were rabid, like bloodthirsty. I mean, you'd have to do something really bad for me to put another human being in a cage. They'll do it if you disobey them. They'll do it if they say you drove too fast, or if you drove without permission, or if your tag's expired. They think it's justifiable to kill you. I mean, that's pretty transparent. What they're
Well,
doing is evil, and they do it every day. They get away with it.
well, right, but like, how can you make sure that the training that you gave them stuck and that they didn't just tell you like some platitude so that you would stop talking to them? How can you be
Oh,
sure?
they do that sometimes. Yeah, they do that sometimes. Sometimes they just, we call them strokers. You know, they just, and they go away and they don't want to hear anymore. And it's like, okay, I know, but they still let me drive away with no license tag or insurance, dark tinted windows. They still let me go. But to them, there's easier fish to fry, right? They don't have to morally justify what they're doing. But that's not all of them. A lot of them thank me, you know, and a lot of them turn over a new leaf. And some of them get so mad they threaten my life. I had a cop up in North Carolina say, "Get out of town." I said, "Are you threatening me with violence?" He goes, "Yep." He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to look at the how immoral and how evil his behaviors are. He enjoyed. getting away with violently victimizing peaceful people. But now the other cops that I talked to, there are five of them altogether. Two or three of them are all on board, right? But they're not going to push that guy out, because they're a gang. They have to depend on each other. They want somebody there to shoot with them, so they're not going to push them out. I'd have to win over a lot more to get them to do it. I mean, as far as proving what I do, well, if I flip a whole town and you don't have to get a license and there's no punishment for anything, that as long as you don't harm anybody, I mean, that's as transparent as you get. I mean, once the town is free,
Well, right, and
right?
that sounds like a good hypothetical, but you say that that's one of your future goals. You haven't done that yet, right?
Well, I'm working on it. If I can get Joe Lopez to run on peaceful policing, and then that'll be pretty good. I think they have 1,700 deputies, and if I
Right.
can get him to win the election and get 1,700 deputies to never bother another peaceful person again, that would be proof. That would be pretty transparent. I mean, I know it's a big goal, probably won't happen, but I'm going to keep trying.
Right. Okay. So basically your idea is it's less that it has worked demonstrably, and it's more that you want to see if adopted as a broader movement, and done by a ton of people, like critical mass of people, one could say, if this changes the way policing works. It's less that you've seen it work on mass. It's less that it's had a 100% success rate, and it's more that the movement could have a positive result if mass adopted.
Well, yeah, if enough people learn how I win them over, somebody else out there could actually succeed at doing this, right? They may be in a small town where there's just one sheriff and two or three deputies, and they may walk down there and talk about this and win them over, and now you got a free town, right? You don't have to pay taxes either, is the whole idea, right? And then to get them paid voluntarily, I was going to go business to business with the sheriff and explain to them that they don't have to pay taxes. The police will, the deputy sheriff and his deputies will actually protect you from the IRS, from anybody who threatens you with violence. They will deal with them. So now you don't have to pay taxes anymore. But are you willing to voluntarily fund the sheriff's department so you can call somebody if you need someone? Well, if I don't have to pay 5,000 a year in taxes, I give you $1,000. What? I'm saving 4 grand, right? So that's the idea. Now, whether it's going to work or not, I don't know. But once the police have left peaceful people alone, once they start policing with moral principles, once they start doing things just like the rest of us, right? I mean, I can't go around pulling people over and stealing their money. You can't do it, so they shouldn't be able to do it either. I can't beat people up for disobeying me, so they anything we can't do, they shouldn't be able to do. But if you got a gun and you roamed around and you were, available to people if they needed some guy with a gun, fine with me. Just leave peaceful people alone. What's so hard to understand? It's a very simple concept.
Right.
We
Okay.
just got to get them to adopt it.
So how do you win them over? What do you have, like a sort of 10-step approach?
Yeah, it actually ended up being like 50 steps, actually. I broke it down yesterday. I think we got it down to 12 with like sub steps, but it's just like training anything else. I've been a sales manager for many years, decades actually, ran my own business. I used to recruit, hire, and train salespeople all the time. And if I taught somebody sales, I usually did a week of product and service, and then I would do, the company and stuff. And then I'd do a week of sales to give you the basics, the basics that you need to go out there and sell. I even train experienced salespeople so they learn how to do it the right way. But that would take about a week coming in for 5, 6 hours a day. So, I mean, it's like 30 hours just to give you the basics. So, to train you how to win over a cop is going to take at least that. I tell people, even if you're good at sales, it'd probably take about 20 hours. And I had my first class today, and I did a little test at the end. And the first thing the people in my class said was, "Yeah, we need a lot more training. It's not easy, you know." Yeah, and you got to do a lot of role playing, and you got to practice. It's unfortunately it's a little complicated to get to do this without the knowledge. But I'll tell you, once you learn it, once you understand it, it's real easy. You'll be able to, I mean, you can do it anytime you want. Pretend you're a cop, try to get my ID and see what I say. There's just no way.
Gotcha. So, on that score, how many people have you already trained?
Oh, not many. I mean, I quit for a couple of years. I probably got partial training on maybe half a dozen people, full training on maybe two. I'm just starting out. I'm just cranking it back up again. Like I said, I used to consult people on defending themselves in court. Then I went into this because I figured, well, if I teach them how I get cops to leave me alone, they don't have to go to court,
Right.
right? So yeah, I'm just gearing back up again to do this, and we'll see what happens with this class. I mean, I accept more people in the class, as many as possible. I would really like to get a lot of people. I want to get a lot of people not only knowing how to do this, but I want them to do it better than I do.
All right.
I want them to master this.
What's like, I guess, a brief bit of advice that you could give to the common person that might diffuse an interaction with a police officer relatively quickly? Like, there's a series called Flex Your Rights that's basically the handbook for a lot of people. But it leads to the sort of approach that that doctor was doing, and you say that you have a better way to do things. So, what would be your sort of like elevator pitch to the common person as to how to do this?
I'd be careful doing anything. Like I said, you're dealing with a very violent gang, and you don't know if you're dealing with somebody who's just looking for an excuse to hurt you or even kill you. So, I mean, in general, I would say, excuse me, um, I would always ask for moral justification, right? I don't obey right away. I would only obey if there was a clarified threat of violence, right? So if a cop tries to get you to obey, or show your ID or do this or whatever, and say, well, what are you going to do if I don't do that? If I don't obey you, are you willing to hurt me? And if they're willing to come out and state that they will hurt you, then I would obey under duress, under threat, and I would do it myself now. You know, if they're willing to brutalize, and I've asked them, I said, how bloody are you willing to beat a peaceful person? Uh, to prove your point. And if you're willing to kill me, then fine. Here's my ID. What am I going to do? And the other thing is to give them an option. You know, you first morally justify it, only obey out of threat of violence, and give them an option. It really bothers me when I watch these videos and I see that missed opportunity. They always seem to miss the opportunity of saying, hey, look, you have an option here. You can use the politician's dictates called law as an excuse to hurt a peaceful person, or you can use your discretion and choose a peaceful option. Like you found me being peaceful when you came up here, right? So which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the violent or the peaceful? And try to get a commitment out of them that you're going to resolve it peacefully. I'm a
Okay.
peaceful person. I don't harm or threaten to harm other peaceful people. Can I count on you to work with me toward a peaceful resolution?
So,
So, I mean, those. Go ahead.
so essentially, you're trying to sell them on the concept of a peaceful resolution. It's less about necessarily psychology. It's less about loyalty to one group of people or another, the people or the blue line, and it's more about trying to appeal to their interests.
Well, I try to. I honestly, I come from a point of trying to help them. I'm trying to get them to pull up their suppressed moral principles and live by those moral principles and ignore the politicians' dictates, ignore their job duties, right? And I understand that they have quotas and all these other issues. I get that, right? But if you can reach them, if you can get them to morally justify, then you're not telling them anything. You're not teaching them anything. You're not arguing anything. You're actually getting them to answer the question and morally to justify what they're doing. And so there's a good chance they'll listen to themselves. They'll listen to the answer that they give, but they'll never listen to me. They don't care what I have to say, right? So I'm basically trying to get them to pull up their moral principles and ignore the politicians' dictates, leave peaceful people alone, and live a better life.
All right. So, okay, we're brushing up against the end of this. I wanted to ask you first off, um, in general, uh, what is your view on the sort of First Amendment, Second Amendment auditing community, and how can somebody with a gun be treated less like a threat by a cop without sacrificing that freedom? Because people like Philando Castile, John Crawford III, Tamir Rice, uh, all these like peaceful people who've been either like surrounded by police who treated them like a terrorist or uh, immediately killed by whichever cop was there. All these people uh, could have been handled better, like especially Daniel Shaver, who was forced to crawl on his knees and eventually murdered by Philip Brailsford, who had "You're fucked" printed on his dust cover. Um,
Right.
how do you talk to a cop like that without dying? Because ultimately, a lot of cops get away with that sort of thing in the end. I mean, Brailsford is completely unimpacted, except he got like paid leave, paid vacation because he has psychological problems now from all the hate people mean to him. So, like, I don't I'm not 100% sure about the success in circumstances such as those
Well,
where you're dealing with.
I tell you what I'll I'll tell you what I'll do with each one. Give me one. I'll tell you what I would have done.
Okay, all right. John Crawford III was in a Walmart. He saw a BB gun that was misplaced in the pet food section. And all he was doing was still resuming his shopping. And his plan was to take the BB gun back to the section where the BB gun was sold, um, so that no kid would be able to pull it off. Because like if I remember this correctly, the BB gun was previously locked up, and somebody asked for it to be unlocked and then just left it in the pet food section. So he was like casually wandering around in the same area as this BB gun, and it wasn't a real gun, but the CCTV captured what happened next, which was after some people snitched on him because they claimed it was a black man with a gun. Cops came in and immediately opened fire as soon as they got there. How do you deal with that sort of situation? Because a lot of cops um, immediately increase the force continuum.
Well, I mean, if those cops went through my training, they wouldn't have done that. But I mean, if you're asking me what I would do if I was in the position of the guy with the gun, I mean, I guess I would get shot. I mean, what are you going to do? They didn't even give him a chance to say anything.
Oh,
You know, they
okay.
came in, they executed him.
So by that token, you're saying that there are some instances where talking isn't really the answer.
Well, they won't let you talk. There's absolutely instances where they're not even going to give you a chance. Yeah. I'm saying the majority of the times I've been able to talk to them. But yeah, I've had problems myself where they were like robots. They didn't care anything I had to say.
Right.
So I
Okay.
warned people it's very dangerous. But like in that situation, there's really nothing you can do. Now, the guy that was crawling down the hallway, what was his name?
Daniel Shaver.
Yeah, Daniel Shaver. You know, I would have played dead. I know how dangerous cops are. I'm not getting into a deadly game of Simon Says. And I said that right away when I first saw that. I would have just laid there with my hands out and I wouldn't have moved.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't. I'm not getting into that. I mean, if some cop is giving you orders or they're giving you commands, play dead is the best advice I can give you.
Gotcha. All right. So on all these levels, really, like it's an interesting concept because, like for instance, the Second Amendment community at large has a very distinct flavor of "Don't tread on me," "Molon Labe," that sort of thing. So what I'm wondering is, why should we give these people this sort of level of deference and respect, and not use our Second Amendment rights in these situations?
No, it may come down to that. I mean, I would like to. I hope that my moral approach works so it doesn't have to happen, but it may end up. Yeah, that very well could be. Um, I did want to comment about what was the guy. He had his gun, the permit.
What,
I can't
Philando
remember.
Castile?
Yeah. Yeah, on that one, I don't tell, I wouldn't tell the cops I had a gun ever, ever. Don't ever tell them you have a gun if you have a gun. I mean, that's one of the things they do to provoke, to set you up. You got any guns in the car? Right? They're trying
Right.
to escalate it with that question. So no, or I wouldn't even answer them actually. I would go right into my moral approach because they've done that to me. You got any guns in the car? And so, well, wait a minute, how do you morally justify threatening a peaceful person with violence? And then they forget the question altogether.
Mm. So it can act as a distraction. You're saying?
Right? Yeah. Well, it's a pattern interrupt. I'm interrupting their pattern of control and getting them to defend what they're doing, which most human beings are ready and prepared to defend their actions. They're just not ready to morally defend it, right? They can always legally defend it. They can always say, "Oh, the law this, my job that." But when you get them to morally defend it, it kind of throws them off, and they forget they asked me for my ID. They forget they asked me about guns. Because it goes into a conversation that makes them curious,
Right, because pattern interruption is actually one of the first steps of de-escalation too.
right?
All right.
Yep.
So basically, you your primary thrust in this instance is to try and get people to behave more in their personal interactions, like a threat management scenario where you're trying to bring the situation down. You're not trying to bring it up. And you think that if more people sort of did this and sort of tried to have a calm repartee with the cops, that the cops would be more likely, in general, to have a calm repartee with the people.
Yeah, I mean, either that or like I said, they will avoid it altogether and just walk away, right? There's easier fish to fry. Which is
Right.
still a win, right? They still left you alone. But I follow them to their cars and I keep trying to win them over. I even have business cards I made up, said peacefulpolice.com. And I hand them my cards and I try to win them over. But, some of them don't want to be won over.
All right. Well, I guess that's actually an interesting way to seg. Um, hand people your business card right here. Where can they find you, and where's the best place to get to like sort of an introduction to your ideas?
Well, I'm just getting this started up. I've had peacefulpolice.com for a while and themoralapproach.com. It was a mess. I cleaned them up. There's nothing really there now, a paragraph or two. I need to get to that and put something on there, but I do have good friends working on a website called moralkungfu.com. Moral Kung Fu is what they named it. And there's more on there than I have on the other two sites, but I will get to them. You can get some stuff on there. I did an interview a couple of years ago. They called me the cop whisperer. It was some radio show. That was pretty funny. Called me the cop whisperer. But if you type in my name, Robert Landen, and cop whisperer, you should be able to pull that up. That was a fun interview. And I'll get as much as I can up on these websites when I get to it. But right now, I've just been really busy training people, and I would like to train more people. So if anyone wants training, let me know. I'd like to fill a class up and get as many people out there doing this as possible.
All right. So the is it the moral approach or moralapproach.com?
No, I got themoralapproach.com and then I got peacefulpolice.com. And then there's
Gotcha.
moralkungfu.com.
And I guess the last question would be, um, what do you have to say to all the immoral cops who aren't willing to listen to any sort of reason at all because they're not in it for that?
Oh yeah, I've met a few of those, and it's a damn shame they have to be so evil. What would I say to them? I don't think anything I say is going to change them. I mean, there's some people, I'm sorry to say, that can't stop what they're doing without violence against them, right? I mean, there's some people that just aren't going to stop. I mean, it's sad. I don't know what I could say to them other than I wish you'd turn over a new leaf. It's a better life over here when you're peaceful with peaceful people. You'll feel better about yourself. You know, cops have the highest rates of domestic violence and alcoholism, and they beat their wives and kids more than any other occupation out there. You know, they got the highest rates of suicide and murder suicide. They kill their families and themselves more than any other occupation. And why is that? I think it's because when you require human beings to violently victimize peaceful people as a career, it's hard to handle as a human being. You know, if I had to do that, I might drink and beat someone up and kill myself too. So if you're one of those evil cops that are out there violently victimizing people and enjoying it, why don't you try being a peaceful cop and see how that goes for a little while? You probably like it.
All
Answer
right.
your question.
Well, with all that being said, if you also want to come on and talk about your approach to cops, even if it's nowhere near this peaceful, feel free to hit me up. Also, feel free to check out those videos I mentioned. I have one on ACAB, so if any of you are interested in finding out more about that, you can check that out. I also have a video debunking the war on police. But I also have videos on Rayford Davis. I interviewed him. He's an ex-cop turned anarchist. And I also have a ton of videos interviewing several other people. So feel free to check out any of those, subscribe, like, all that stuff, and check out Liberty Professionals and Agorist Nexus for my recent piece on why Facebook is not a private company. But all that being said, be well. Smash the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.